Hey guys, we are in history right now, and we are history part 9, I believe, right now. And we just discussed the rise of industry, the industrial revolution, where everything is being made much more easily now. And now we're going to get back to our monarchies. Remember, the first one we talked about was King Henry VIII. He wasn't the first king, but because William the Conqueror was before him, but he was the first one we talked about in this chapter. Remember, there's King Henry VIII. He had lots and lots of wives. Remember, I talked about it. He was trying to have sons, but but his wives kept having daughters, and and he would put his wife to death for some trumped up reason, and then get another wife, and then marry her, and she'd have a daughter, and then put her to death, and so on and so on. He never actually had a son. His daughter was Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth became queen after that. She was a great, great queen. Which you're going to find that the queens are like the best in England. And queens were the best ones. So you had King Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Then King James I, who the King James version of the Bible is named after. He was also the one who started taking too much power, and the Pilgrims, he started persecuting people, and the Pilgrims left England, went to Holland, and back to America. Not back to America, to America. And then his King James I's son was King Charles I, took even more power for himself, pushed Parliament down. When he was put to death, executed, and there was the English Civil War, led by the parliamentarians, or Roundheads as they were called, were against the king, and the Cavaliers or Royalists were for the king, and they took over, executed the king. King Charles I took over, and then they put Oliver Cromwell in the place, but he became a dictator and was not really very good. So when he died, they said, let's just put the king back. And so they put the king back in place, King Charles II, who was King Charles I's son. And that period was called the Restoration. He came back to the throne, but he wasn't a great king because this was a time of spiritual decline. People didn't really follow the Bible very well. After he died, came King James II, who was the son of King Charles II, and people didn't really like him. They thought he was going to bring the tyranny back from King James I and King Charles I, and so they offered the crown. So that line, that was the direct line, they cut that off and offered it to William and Mary. James's daughter, and so King James II's daughter, Mary, and her husband. So again, it's the daughter, and they were very good, and they brought about the English bill, the Bill of Rights, and then after that came Queen Anne. She was good. There's not a lot of information about her in this chapter, but after Queen Anne, that's what we're going to pick up today. So. The best ones, essentially, whenever there's a woman on the throne, England does well. So after Queen Anne's reign, during Queen Anne's reign, by the way, they had that was like the Industrial Revolution and everything, and Protestant work ethic, things are going well. After Queen Anne's reign, there were 4 different kings named George. So picture that, 4 in a row, 4 Georges in a row. It's hard to kind of get them straight. George I is nothing in this chapter about. George II was during the French and Indian War in America, and through the French and Indian War, I don't know if you remember that from last year's history, but basically the English were fighting the French, and through that they won possession of Canada. Then King James III came, and King James III was King George III came, and he was the king that, and by the way, I'm on page 210. I didn't even mention that. I'm on page 210. King George III came. So after Queen Anne was King George I, which we don't really have that much about. King George II was the French and Indian War. So war was fought and England won. Then King George III came along, and that was the American Revolution, where Declaration of Independence, like our birth as a nation, was King George III. So a lot of England viewed him as a failure. It was during his reign that a huge chunk of the world of the empire just gone. And then after King George III died, King George IV, his brother, I'm sorry, King George IV came to the throne, and then he dies shortly after. And after he died, King William IV came to the throne for a short amount of time. And after he died, he was. You don't really need to know the Georges, other than I want you to just know George the Third was the one during the American Revolution, but William the Fourth came to the throne, and then he was the uncle of the next heir to the throne would be a girl named Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria, as we're going to see, hint, she was a queen, so she was very good. She had ruled England for almost 64 years. So you see, she came to the throne when she was, I think, just 18. She was really, really young. She might have even been younger than that. But she was a young girl, and she ruled all of England. And there's some fascinating, there's some fascinating shows and documentaries about her. Different people thought that when she came to the throne, because she was so young, they thought they could control her. But she ended up being like, no, I'm gonna be a queen. I'm gonna rule, and I'm gonna do what I want. And they thought they could make her a puppet, but it was actually a very difficult time for England, and she did incredibly well. Let's read about her. The Victorian Age, just like there was the Elizabethan Age under Elizabeth, this is the Victorian Age. Page 210. When Victoria was just a girl, she realized that she would probably be the next Queen of England. Her uncles had ruled poorly because they were disobedient to God's moral laws. Princess Victoria determined that she would not follow their example. I will be good, she said. I will be good. She resolved when she was 11 years old. When she was just 18, there you go, so that's the answer. When she was just 18, she became queen. Now, the 18 seems really old to you guys. That seems like an adult, but 18 is like just a kid. I didn't know what I was doing when I was 18 years old. And all through her long life, she kept her childhood resolve, and England reaped the blessings of having a righteous ruler. The Bible says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, and when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is the reproach of any people. So basically, if a ruler is righteous, they're most of the time the nation rejoices because of them. Queen Victoria was so beloved by her people, and this was somebody, by the way, early in her reign, they were not happy with her. They thought that, how is an 18-year-old going to do? You know, she's a girl, and she's only 18. What's this going to be? They were very critical. Everything she did, there were people trying to take political advantage of everything, trying to twist it, make it so that it wasn't, something different than she meant it to be. But she ended up being very successful. And the people, she was so beloved eventually by her British subject that British people ever since have looked back to her reign with respect and pride. The years of her rule are called the Victorian Age in her honor. This was like one of the high points of all of the England's age was here. The Elizabethan Age and the Victorian Age were like the two high points of all of English history. The British Empire. During the reign of Queen Victoria, England ruled the largest empire in history. The sun never sets on the British Empire, people said, and they were right. Now, okay, so picture this. England is small, okay? The United Kingdom is maybe the size of smaller than New England, but England itself is like, I don't know, the size of like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, maybe a little bit of Vermont too. That's how big England is. Not very big. And at one point in time, they ruled. They say that the whole thing was the sun never sets on the English Empire because they had colonies around the entire earth, right? They had colonies on every inch of the globe. And again, they're the size of like Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And they had the largest empire, spread out empire, in the history of all mankind, the largest empire in history. And they were a tiny little nation, like smaller than New England. Isn't that incredible? Millions of people around the world, 1/4 of the Earth's population at that time, or under the rule of Queen Victoria. She had 1/4 of the world's population were English subjects. God used her empire to keep peace and order in the world through the establishment of wise laws and through the work of many missionaries who went out from Britain to the far corners of the empire. The empire gave Britain wealth and power, and Britain shared with the countries it ruled its biblical heritage and its tradition of representative government. India, Pakistan, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Jamaica, Egypt, Sudan, Nigeria, Rhodesia, which is modern-day Zimbabwe, and South Africa were just some of the lands included in the vast British Empire. British industry prospered so much at this time that Britain was called the workshop of the world. So just everything's going right for Britain. Britain is influencing the entire world. Victorian literature. Many excellent books were written during the Victorian Age. Robert Browning and Alfred Lord Tennyson were two famous poets. Charles Dickens wrote many short stories and novels that are still enjoyed today, including A Christmas Carol and David Copperfield. A Christmas Carol is the one with like Tiny Tim and Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future. And that was written during this time. Rudyard Kipling wrote stories set in many interesting colonies of the British Empire, including the children's classic, The Jungle Book. By the way, if you ever want to read The Jungle Book, it's very, very different from the regular book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, as is most of Disney's movies that they're based on. Like The Little Mermaid as an actual book isn't anything like the Little Mermaid movie. It's like not a great book or whatever, but they Disneyfy things and make them different. But anyway, Victorian scientists. There was a lot of scientific achievements during this time. The Victorian Age was a time of great scientific discoveries and inventions. Two of the most respected Victorian scientists were Michael Faraday and Lord Kelvin. They were very influential. They were both physicists. So as a physics teacher, I like both of those guys. Both men were Christians who had a high regard for the Bible. They did much to help the English people understand the principles of science. Victorian benevolence. Benevolence. Whenever you see B-E-N or B-E-N-E in a word, it means good. So benevolence means doing kind deeds for others. You can tell just right away. If you ever see B-E-N in a word, Ben means good, and M-A-L means bad. So mal is bad, Ben is good. And so benevolence. The Victorian Age was a time of great benevolence. They were doing kind deeds for others. Missionaries who went to the British colonies taught the people to read and gave them Bibles and other books in their own language. At home, many people thought of ways to help those who were less fortunate than they. George Mueller is an unbelievable guy. I read his biography. George Mueller, a man of great faith and prayer, started orphanages in which he housed and fed thousands of children, homeless children. He depended on God alone to send in the money to keep the orphanages going. Like his biography is essentially like it almost gets boring, almost not like that. Stay with me here. It almost gets boring because the same thing keeps happening over and over again. Not that it's a boring thing, but what ends up happening is he runs out of money. They have no food. They have like 100 kids that need breakfast in the morning, and they have no food for the next day. And the cooks come up and say, "We have no food to feed these children." He goes, "Okay, there'll be food tomorrow." And he just goes into his closet and prays for a few hours. And all of a sudden, like somebody just shows up at the door and like in the morning and says, "Hey, I just had my truck just broke down and I have all this food that needs to be eaten right away and I got to get rid of it. Is there anybody that needs food here? I have like 100 kids worth of food." And he's just like, "Oh, okay, great, thanks. God provided for us." And like, obviously that's unbelievably incredible. But in the biography, it happens over and over and over and stuff like that. They like run out of food and run out of this and run out of that. And they have nothing. And he's just like, "Okay, I'll go pray about it," and just goes and prays, and then he comes back and goes, "Oh, is there anything yet?" And then also it's like a knock on the door. "Hey, I'm just wondering if you guys needed this food or whatever," and it's like, "Oh, thanks," And people are like, "Are you kidding me?" That's like the whole biography. It's unbelievable. He's an unbelievable man of God, George Mueller, and he had like orphanages all over England. William Booth started the Salvation Army to help people in the slums of London lead transformed lives by the power of Christ. You've probably seen a Salvation Army that might have like clothes or something like that you can buy at discounted prices. They basically started as a Christian organization to help less fortunate people. Florence Nightingale, she's an important person. You need to know about her. Florence Nightingale started the modern nursing profession and opened the first school for nurses in England. So she started, nursing. Some of your Caleb, your parents are nurses. Nurses got their start by Florence Nightingale. She started that profession. Many Christian groups built hospitals in England and throughout the empire in order to care for the sick. The secret of England's greatness. Once, a great chief from one of the African colonies actually went to London to see Queen Victoria during this time. What is the secret of your country's greatness? He was like, your country is so incredible. I need to know the secret. And the Queen didn't take him to the Tower of London and show him the glittering crown of jewels. She did not speak to him with the brilliant politicians who debated each other in Parliament. She didn't even point to England's long heritage of freedom. Instead, she gave the chief a Bible. She said, "Here is the secret of England's greatness," said the Queen, and the English people agreed. About the same time, a prince of India recognized this truth. Where do the English-speaking people get all their intelligence, and energy, and cleverness, and power, he asked. Is it their Bible that gives it to them? It is their Bible that gives it to them. That was my question. And now that they bring it to us and say, this is what raised us, take it and raise yourselves. So Christianity spread throughout the world, partially because of England. And England, basically the Victorian Age is just an incredible, incredible time when England goes from being just another nation. Remember I talked about previously the Spanish Armada. Spanish ruled the seas and the French, and like there were a lot of nations that were the French and the Spanish and the Germans, and they were all like kind of alike. But England just soars to the front of the pack during the Victorian Age, and unfortunately, we are going to see next time that there's going to be a lot of decline in England after that, because in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and during the middle 1800s, there come a lot of ideas, false ideas, that take people away from the Bible, and we see a decline in England for at least a little bit. So, all right, that's your history lesson for today. Tune in tomorrow for another history lesson. See you guys later.